From World War I, we are going to go back in time about 400 years, 420 years or so. And I'm excited to play this. So this is Fornovo 1495 from Compass Games. This is the first and so far only game in the Order of Arms system, which is a system that was designed based off of an existing system covering Napoleonic battles called Eagles of the Empire. There have been a number of games in the Eagles of the Empire series, all by the same designer. I believe Avalanche Press published the first 4 in the 90s, I believe. And then Compass published the last one in 2008, which was Spanish Eagles, which was the Battle of Talavera and Albuera, I believe, in the Napoleonic Wars. And this system is an area-based grand tactical system that has actually got some really interesting mechanics. And, what's interesting about this is that, well, maybe interesting to me, is that I had kept my eye on this game before it came out because I love the medieval era. And I didn't really know anything about this other than the counter art being absolutely beautiful. If you see here, and I'll show you a little bit later as well, but you can see these counters are absolutely gorgeous. So I was interested in this period. The Italian wars between the French and Italians are an interesting period that I know not so much about, but wanted to learn more by playing the game. And so the designer released Fornovo 1495 in 2016. Now, for one reason or another, I believe it's because after I looked at it and found out it was area movement, I decided not to pull the trigger on it. Because I'm not a fan of area movement games. In general, I don't like the abstraction of area movement. However, this being a grand tactical system, some of the really interesting rules about this game and the way that area movement sort of enhances the feel of the scale is super compelling to me. So I finally managed to track down a copy, and I pulled the trigger, punched and clipped. We're going to play it on the channel. I'm very excited for it. So it's one battle, which is the Battle of Fornovo, obviously, but it comes with 4 scenarios, and we're going to be doing the first scenario, which is basically the battle itself. So normally the historical full scenario starts at 10 a.m. on the day of battle, and this scenario is going to start at 1 p.m. On the day of battle. So we're a little bit into sort of the maneuver. And I'll take this box out of the way. Before I do that, real quick, I'll just mention, so Order of Arms is set to be a series of games. Hopefully more come out. I believe the next one is a Tannenberg game, and then I think the designer is also working on some Wars of the Roses stuff as well. So there's a lot of potential here because the system is made to cover everything from the year 1000 to about 1500 or so, all the way up to the Renaissance. So with that being said, this is what the map looks like. And there's a lot of interesting stuff. So where to begin? So up here, I put this sort of turn record track on the map because we're probably not going to be using this. But like I was saying, so the full scenario, the French basically start over here, I believe, deployed. And then the Italians, who are basically, the Italians have been in kind of a defensive posture historically, and they're worried that the French are going to attack the city of Parma. And so the Italians move from being in a defensive posture to an attacking posture and decide that they're going to launch an attack across the Taro River, which you can see splitting the battlefield here in the middle. So the French have to form up for battle to defend. And so this scenario starts sort of a couple hours into that maneuver before sort of the first clashes. On the north side of the river, we've got the French. On the south side of the river, we've got the Italians, the League of Venice specifically. And then, like I was saying, you've got the turn track up here. So we're starting at the 1 p.m. turn, and it's going to go potentially up to the 6 p.m. turn. Each turn is about 20 minutes. You can see that each army has an elan track, and this represents kind of their morale. So if you've ever played Great Battles of History or anything like that, this basically is your army morale. If it ever goes to 0, some very bad things start to happen, and it's possible you rout off the field. You've got a potential reinforcement here with a couple of mounted men-at-arms with this leader. There's some rules around that. I will explain it as we go. The one thing I will mention at the beginning of this video, the scenario says the second turn of the game at 1340, but then it also says the game actually starts at 1300. So I'm unclear if the designer meant turn 2 of the scenario 1320 or it actually is supposed to be 1340. So I will have one more look at that, but if you've played this and there's any errata on that I could not find, let me know. But anyways, the other thing you should see here is there's actually a weather track here. The scenario is actually going to start in rain, and that's going to affect visibility for ranged units and their attacking. But more importantly, and let me get it out here for you, is there is a very complex and in-depth weather system and its effect on the river for this battle, which I'm very impressed by just reading the rules. So basically a turn can either be clear, cloudy, rain, or storm, and if it goes into rain or storm, based on what was in the previous turn, you get various parts of the river either flooding or rising, having rising waters, and that's going to affect what units can move through them, where you can move across the river or not, and if you have units in the river, in a section of the river, when it goes to flooded, they just get eliminated straight out. So it's going to be a risky proposition for any unit to be in any of these river areas if we get a lot of precipitation. And obviously you can see some of these really good League of Venice men-at-arms units start in sort of the riverbed while the sort of river is at low water levels. But as you can see, some of these sections, basically all of these one sections, we've got rising waters because we are starting in rain. And the assumption is that this is the first turn of rain for the actual, the first rain of the day, essentially, for the battle. And so that could affect what's going to happen here. Now, this is a very in-depth system. I've studied the rulebook for a couple days now, and I'm still not sure that I am totally 100% understanding of sort of everything. It's pretty procedurally heavy. I mean, I would say probably about 30% of the rulebook is dedicated to nothing but charge rules for men-at-arms units. Because that's sort of the big focus of this battle, and this system primarily is how do these cavalry charges? There's sort of the hammer blow that you use to knock out the opponent, and how and when you use them is the most important thing. So it's very procedurally heavy in regards to how you charge and all sort of the steps that go into that. I think it's like an 11-step process. I can show you the player aids, which are actually, the player aids are designed, and the rulebook in general is designed in a really cool way. It's a lot of flowcharts, so you can see the procedures visually rather than just looking at a list of procedures, which a lot of war games tend to do. You've got a weapons versus armor table, so every unit's going to have an armor class, and then based on what type of attack you're doing with what type of unit and what weapons they have equipped, you're going to get some DRMs. In this game, it's pretty simple. 6s are hits. Anything not a 6 is not a hit. But how you get dice and how you allocate them and all of that stuff is actually fairly involved. So this is, you might recognize something like this from the Men-at-Arms, which is another medieval combat series from GMT. But the one thing I did want to open to is the charge, here. So if you look here, this is the procedure for doing charge attacks, charge combats, basically. You have to check to see if you have line of sight, and then you go in to select your targets of the charge. Is there going to be a counter charge? Are archers who are within range and eligible able to fire at the charging units? And then there's a whole resolution step, and then the charging unit either wins or falls back. There's a lot going on here. Tactically, which would make sense from a grand tactical system, but you can see that the graphic design of these procedures are actually laid out pretty cool. I wish more games did sort of a visual flowchart for procedures on things. So this is a close combat thing, and you can see that, if there's shielded units, you do one thing, versus if there's not, you do other things, and it breaks it down point by point, and it actually gives the rules reference down here, which is really nice, so you can look up what you're doing. I'm going to be referring to the rules a lot as I learn the game, so I probably won't jump right into the first initial engagements because I really need to see how it plays out so I can talk about it in a knowledgeable way, but a lot of resources here to hopefully help me do that. I'll take this off and talk about the units a little bit. So obviously, like you saw, there's a bunch of different types of units. Here you've got some infantry units with their armor class, and their combat value, which is typically the number of dice they contribute to an attack, and their elan rating, which is used to basically check. It represents basically their morale or other types of things, but basically you're going to be doing a lot of checks against this in various situations and conditions to see if potentially they rout, or if they can use special abilities and stuff like that. You've also got leaders, which you can see here. This one is Piero Schiavo. You've got his tactical rating here, which is the number of units he can give a bonus to that he may be with. You've got his second number. Let's see. Second number is his command rating, and that's important, and I will explain that in a second, but basically his activation number. And then you've got his control radius, which is the number of areas from him that he can command units in his sort of formation. And there are negative penalties for units getting out of range of their leader. You've also got these big units here. These are mostly mounted men-at-arms, and these are sort of the main highlights of the game, the main pieces, the powerful punch units. Again, they've got a combat rating and an elan, and an armor class, and you can see how much better they are. These guys can also dismount and go on foot, and there may be advantages for that. in the game, rather than being mounted based on the die roll modifiers they get based on who they're fighting. You can see actually that in the opening stages here, so the river has a ford, which means it's crossable right here, and you've got a mounted man at arms, and Fortebraccio di Montone, the leader here, who could potentially charge across this ford and into this area here, where you've got some Swiss, looks like to be polearm units, and then you've got this unit who's in phalanx formation, this Swiss, another pike, Swiss pike unit. He's actually pretty powerful, and he's elite, and so he's in phalanx. And so units in phalanx, if they have pikes, they can obviously get the benefit, the anti-cavalry benefits of being in phalanx, and there's also some other things that they can do as well. So he's probably not going to want to charge into this area. You've also got artillery units. Let's see if I can find some. I believe, here we go, there's one under here. So you've got this artillery commander here, and his artillery unit. This is a long-range, light artillery, So artillery comes in light, medium, heavy. The French will have some heavy artillery up in somewhere in here. There's an artillery commander with heavy artillery. I think they're in this stack right there. And then, so artillery obviously is going to play a big role. You fire at the ranged number of cannonballs here, and then artillery can limber and unlimber to move around. Light artillery are super mobile, not so powerful, and the commander here. What else do I need to talk about? I mean, that's kind of the basic gist. So, like I mentioned, this game is area movement, and there's some interesting concepts going on here. So first of all, you can see the areas are divided by these yellow lines. Sometimes in the river they're divided by blue. They can also be divided, like up here, for example, the areas can be divided by this sort of tributary. And then you've got certain terrain. You've got these trees which block line of sight. If you trace through it, each area has a center. You're going to trace center to check your line of sight. There are actually multiple types of lines of check in this game. What I find very interesting is this thing called a line of fight. So it is a grand tactical game. When you attack into an adjacent area in melee combat, you actually choose which stack of units you're going to attack. And if you have multiple units attacking into an area with different stacks, their lines of fight, meaning the approach to the enemy, actually cannot cross each other. So for example, let me give you an example. If there was a, let's say this guy is here and this guy is here. So if we were going to attack into this area with these guys could not attack him, and this guy could not attack him at the same time because their line of approach to these units would actually cross each other, and that is not allowed. So the positioning of your units in these areas actually matters, and this is what actually drew me to the system, because the positioning of your units matters inside the areas, and so what direction you face them also matters. So for example, if this unit was, or these two units were facing this way, this would be a flank if these guys attacked here, because they're facing this way, so facing also matters. And so this unit, for example, its flank areas are this one and this one, and you're looking at this line. So this line in the middle of the counter denotes which areas are your flanks, and so which areas these lines are pointing at are your flanks. And that means that this is a front area, this is a front area, this is also a front area for this unit. However, if he was positioned like this, then only this and this are front areas. This becomes a flank, and this is a flank, and this area and this area and this area become rear areas. So the positioning and facing of your units is actually important in the game, and I think that tactical consideration kind of alleviates some of the abstraction concerns that I have with area movement games, which is, I think, very cool. The other thing is that these mounted men-at-arms units are double wide, as you can see, and it matters, that matters here, because if you cannot fit this double wide unit inside of an area, it cannot go there. So for example, well, he can fit there. Let's see if I can find a small one. Yeah, here's a good, well, no, that's not a good example either. I'm trying to find a small area where I can show you how this could matter. Well, I'll just use this as an example, but you know, if this unit moves in and he's not able to fit between these lines and he crosses over into another area, he's actually not allowed to do that. And you know, so the way you position these units is going to be really important. The same is true vertically and horizontally. Some areas may only allow you to position with your flanks to the enemy because it is so narrow. And so this is a really cool spatial element to the game that really drew me in. And so that's going to be a big part of the considerations in terms of where you position and how you position your units, which is really cool to me. So real quick, I'm going to go over sort of the tactical considerations here, the strategic considerations for each side, and then we'll jump into gameplay, hopefully. So you've got the League of Venice here. They've got some pretty good units. They've got, you can see they've got, oh, these guys should go back. This guy starts here. This guy starts here. So you've got Rodolfo Gonzaga, who is sort of the prime commander for the League of Venice, and he's got some mounted men-at-arms across this ford. You can see that the Italians control the fords, but the French have formed up in phalanx, and so you don't want to be charging into them. And you can also see that the French have some pretty good mounted men-at-arms and leaders ready to countercharge if possible, or counterattack at the very least. So it's going to be interesting to see how much the League of Venice wants to push up across the river to potentially attack the French versus maybe pelt them with ranged attacks. And the other thing they have to be concerned about is obviously they don't want to be in a position where their backs are to a river that starts to flood, or they're in the river when it floods, God forbid, and suddenly they lose everyone, as I believe historically happened to some of their commanders. Now, the one advantage that the League of Venice has is that they do have some of these units over on the flank, and there's really no resistance here. There's a ford that crosses the river here. And these are two sort of mid-quality, mid-powerful men-at-arms units, so they're probably going to be looking to come up and do a flank attack here, so the French are probably going to want to turn and face that, or at the very least maybe charge to meet them. And they got some infantry in the back here who might be able to come up and support. You can see there's crossbow units here, there's artillery here. So where we sort of position these guys is going to be important. There's really not a lot of tough terrain in this map. For the most part, it's all pretty clear, sort of river hex sides, unless you get sort of back up in the mountains. But if that's happening to the French, they're probably not doing so hot. And victory, there's going to be victory points gained in this game based on sort of a number of different factors. You're going to be able to, well, the first of all is if you lower an enemy's elan to 0, an army's elan to 0, they are going to basically rout, and you'll probably win an automatic victory, I believe is how that works. If not, there will be, I believe at the end of the game, there will be some victory point, a victory point check. Yep, and so there's going to be points given for every type of unit that you eliminate, give different victory point values. So mounted men-at-arms are worth 2, non-mounted men-at-arms steps are worth 2, non-mounted men-at-arms steps are worth 1 VP. If you kill army commanders, you'll get victory points. So basically, you want to annihilate as much as you can. Now, the French are actually here with the King of France himself, Charles VIII, right here. He's got some special Royal Guard units that are pretty good, these Royal Knights, and these Royal Scottish bowmen here. If he dies, it's game over for the French, so they're probably not going to want to put him in the line of fire, but he is on the field, so he would make a juicy target if there can be a breakthrough. And in general, we're just going to smash these guys into each other and see how well this goes. Historically, the French pretty much annihilated the League of Venice. They lost a bunch of their lieutenants and leaders, and I think the French artillery specifically was noted as being extremely capable during this time. They're all stacked under here. These are heavy artillery cannons, which means they cannot move, I believe, unless this leader helps them. But they are pretty powerful, heavy artillery. They have a range of 3, so they're going to be shelling. They have the ability to kind of shell into these sort of like closer river hex sides. So if the League of Venice is going to get across, they're going to have to do it quickly and get out of range of the artillery. And so it should be pretty fun. So I'm gonna try and learn this as we go, despite having read the rules, and get through some of these, and then I'll bring you in closer to the action so we can see some of the cool stuff that happens in this system. All right, so we're on the first activation of the first game turn of the very first move that I'm going to do this game, and already we're looking at some possibilities, tactical possibilities here that could, have ramifications for the battle to come. So first things first, you always, when you're activating your side, the French won the initiative, so they're going to go first, which is great for them because they really needed that because they need to protect this flank over here from the threat of Conte Caiazzo's mounted men-at-arms. So you look for your overall army commander. For the French, this is Marshal de Guy, Maréchal de Guy. He is, you can see his stats here. His command stat is a 4. You roll a d6. If you roll this or under, you take the difference as the number of activations that the army is going to get. Now, in this case, Marshal de Guy rolled a 4. That is exactly equal to his command rating. If that had been a 5 or a 6, that would have meant no command for the French, basically, for this turn, and it would have gone over to the Italian side, and they would have rolled against their army commander to see if they got to move. If you get 2 failed activations in a row, meaning both sides roll higher than the command activation rating, then the turn ends immediately. So turns can be really long if people keep making their rolls, or they can be really short if people fail. In this case, we rolled a 4, so that is exactly equal to his command rating, and it means that he gets 1, basically the army gets 1 command. And in this particular case, he's worried about these cavalry over here getting the jump on this flank, and so he's actually going to activate himself. So when that happens, we are going to flip over his leader counter to activated, which means his formation has been activated. Now he's got basically these 2 mounted crossbow units here. He's got another mounted elite crossbow unit here, and then he's got these 2 mounted men-at-arms and another elite crossbow unit here. So here's the consideration: he can move forward. He's not within charge range, unfortunately, so he's not able to charge these mounted men-at-arms. Not that he'd want to necessarily anyway. We've got rising waters here. If the Italians are quick, they may be able to send some of these on the far bank across this ford here and get across. And suddenly, that would probably be bad for them, because then, if these units here could charge. However, he does have to protect the flank, and so he's got some options now. So what does he want to do? Well, he can swing some of these mounted men-at-arms over to the flank, and then obviously which way they face will be super important. He doesn't want to get flanked, outflanked by them, closer. He also doesn't want to end in charge range of these guys, because the likelihood that the Italians get to activate, they could just immediately charge these mounted men-at-arms. May not be the smartest move. They're not as strong as these, but certainly would play a good defensive role. He also wants to keep these crossbow units close by, because they can actually shoot at any unit that's charging into their space, or if they have a high enough rating, Alon rating, I think it's 4. I'll have to double check, but they can actually shoot adjacent to a charging unit as he goes by. So already we're looking at sort of an important tactical decision here. Do we get within range of potentially some of these ranged units in the Italians? How do we defend this flank? And so I'm going to have to give that some thought right now with sort of this wing of the army, and I will show you how that ends up probably in the next clip, because I don't exactly know what I want to do here, and I've got to do some thinking. All right, ultimately he settled on something like this. Now this is actually a really great example of the positional considerations of the game at play. So De Guy himself, with his mounted men-at-arms and this elite mounted crossbow unit, have moved up one area essentially along this road, and they have turned in such a way that they are sort of covered from both sides. This approach to the river is actually in his front, and this area here is also in his front. So if he does get charged, he will be charged through the front, which will allow him to potentially countercharge. The same is true here of this mounted crossbow unit. His facing means that his front areas, actually, he can shoot into both of these, or he can shoot here as well if he shoots at 2 range. And the same is true here. We basically oriented ourselves such that our front axis is sort of protecting all possible angles. And normally in an area movement game, you kind of wouldn't get this with like a square area, but I really enjoy the fact that sort of this positioning, even though he only moved 1, this positioning prevents him from being flanked right now, even though there's sort of multiple approaches from the Italian mounted men-at-arms. So it's going to put them in an interesting decision space when they get to go and they activate. And ultimately, he's just kind of taken up sort of I would say a defensive posture. He's kind of left his other man-at-arms unit here in a position to charge if some of these units cross the river, especially some of these weak units. If they come across this ford, they can be charged from here, they can be charged from here, but at the same time, he's also facing these Italians if they decide to try and move around the flank. So already some really interesting stuff happening and transpiring, and we'll see where that takes us as we go into the next activation for the Italians, and I will roll that right now. So their overall commander, actually, let me swing the camera around and then I'll do that real fast. All right, so the Italian overall commander is Francesco Gonzaga here. He's a leader with a special tactical ability. I will get into that when it becomes relevant. He just rolled for army activation, and he rolled a 3, which means the Italians get 1 activation, and they are going to have to decide what to do, because now there's a consideration here that now that these units have sort of been noticed and spotted, and the French has turned to face them, they don't want to get charged and attacked in the flank. So they may try to take up a position sort of further away, maybe up in here somewhere against this tree line, and just kind of monitor the situation and get ready for a charge when it presents itself. And they also, that formation, actually, that leader also has these sort of crappy infantry units. In fact, these crossbowmen have an armor of C, so they're like basically naked, and they're just going to get annihilated if they get attacked in close combat. But they are ranged, and so they, if they cross the river here, they could potentially start pelting, the French flank with some arrows, which might harass them, get their attention, and then maybe we start to move some of these units across the river. Or alternatively, maybe it's time to move across the river now before the water gets any higher. I don't know. Decisions. So let's play on a little bit, and then I can sort of more talk about some things in more detail that are more important. But this is the opening phase of the game. Already you can see the decision points, very important, and so it's a pretty cool feel. Okay, so you can see here that the Italians, with their activation, have sort of set up their cavalry into sort of 3 different unit orientations here. Threatening a charge to the French, that's going to cause the French to have to really think about how they respond to this. They don't want to turn their flank to any of these guys who can basically straight up charge in through their front on the next turn. The small infantry units from behind started to move across the river. Now these river, the north side of the river has these sort of like tree lines, and so it's an extra movement point to get across. So the units could not get very far, and the stacking and occupancy limits for some of these spaces has become kind of an issue. I think actually, so all of these started 1, 2, 3. They all have 3 movement points. I'm actually going to swap these. So these infantry are going to stay in the river, and these crossbow units are actually going to come all the way across. That's how that's going to work. So the crossbow units obviously want to get sort of in behind and be ready for a potential French counterattack. They can use their bow fire as long as they're not targeted in support, in combat, and charge attacks, so that will be good. And then over here, so then we went back to the French activation. They failed an activation. They rolled a 5, which is higher than their army commander's command rating. So activation came back to the Italians, and the Italians have decided that they wanted to activate this leader here, who is Ranuccio Farnese. He's got a couple of mounted crossbow units with him. He has 4 movement points. He has probably more than 4 movement points. Let's take a look. He has 5 movement points because he is a mounted light unit. So again, costing 2 points to cross across these trees. So 2, 3. He could move up 1 more and then potentially unleash. Now it put him in a very dangerous position, and he's got a couple of great targets. So he is going to move his full activation. He's going to do his full movement, and he's going to move into this space here. And the reason he's doing that is because he wants to shoot at one of these units. So we've got an A-class armor unit here. We've got these phalanx units. The idea here being that he probably wants to shoot at some of these phalanx units to put some hits on them, especially because I think they have, that's a B armor, which, is not very great. This is a leader there. It's B armor as well. So actually we might be able to kill this leader if we roll really nicely. And we're, if we put hits on this stack here, actually, they'd have to roll a leader casualty, which is interesting. Now he's opened up for these phalanx units to attack him, which would be dangerous, but he is mounted, and I believe he is allowed to retreat before combat if a mounted unit is attacked by only foot units. So he's not in super danger here. He feels comfortable that he's going to be able to run up and shoot some arrows, sort of Hun style, Scythian style. And so let's figure out the target. I think we're going to go after this stack here. So the way this works is we are firing from a 1 hex range. We could also fire from a 2 hex range, but and that provides different options for the defender. But because we're firing from 1 hex, the defender has 2 options. He can stand and receive the attack, and if he's allowed to, he's a ranged unit, he can return fire. Or he can choose to retreat 1 hex and reduce the range strength of the Italians by 1 and reduce the losses inflicted against him by 1. So that's an interesting thought. The problem is if he retreats, he has to retreat all of his units. That's not true. I guess he doesn't have to retreat all of his units. He would retreat the target, and then these units would stay there, which is not the worst thing in the world. So the number of dice he would get, he's got 3, 6, and then his leader's tactical rating, which is a 1, I believe it's the right-hand number. That rating allows him to give 1 unit in his command a +1 DRM. So it'd be 6 dice, one of which would have a +1. So it would hit on a 5 or 6. And then if he's shooting at B armor, I believe he gets another +1 because he's crossbow. And Yeah, he would be getting another +1, or both units would be getting a +1 if they both shoot at B armor unit like this one here. So I think we're going to do that. We're going to target this unit here. So the defender has to decide whether he wants to retreat this unit by one area. The problem is that a lot of these areas, 2, 4, 6, 8, I don't think he'll be able to fit into, actually. I think he may be stuck there because he's a 4 combat strength. That's almost half of the maximum occupancy. I don't think there's anywhere he can go. I think if he goes here, that's 4 as well. 5, 8. Yeah, he won't be able to go there. He would overstack. So it looks like he's just going to have to take it. There's not really any spot that he can go to. He might be able to go here, actually. He maybe could go there. I think if he retreats, he cannot retreat to adjacent to an enemy combat unit. Let me check on that real fast. Yeah, so the rule says he has to not retreat adjacent to an enemy combat unit unless there's no other choice, which in this case there is no other choice. He could retreat here. That would bring this up to a really dense area. You know, he's just going to stay. He's going to stand and take it. So that's where we are. He's going to stand and take it. So we are going to be rolling. So the combat here is going to be 6, 3, and 3. One of these units is going to get a +1 because of the tactical rating of the leader. And then both of these units are going to get a +1 because they are firing at a B armored unit. So let's roll our dice, and then I will show you what we get. And actually, we do have another option here, is we can actually split these attacks against both of these units if we wanted to. We could have this unit fire here and this unit fire here, or because there's a leader stacked with this unit, we could actually split his 3 up between other units. So we could say 2 of these go here, 1 of these go here, which is an interesting idea. Need to think about it. Okay, so I've decided the way this works out, this unit's going to fire at this unit, this unit's going to fire at this unit. This unit's dice are going to be +2, so +1 for shooting at B armor, and then another +1 for the leader giving him that bonus. So 4, 5s, and 6s hit on this unit, and this one's going to be +1 for the B armor, so this is going to be 5s and 6s hit on this unit. Let's roll it up. Okay, so it turns out that was a horrible idea, and also I rolled quite below average. So we did 1 hit to each of these units. Now, unfortunately, the B-class armor actually negates 1 hit when they are hit, so we actually did 0 hits. We moved into range and did 0 hits to these phalanx units, and now they're in close to these phalanxes, and the horses may be getting scared. I don't believe we checked for leader casualties because we didn't do any actual hits to the unit. And so that ends this activation and this ranged combat, and now we go back to the French, and hopefully I can capitalize on this. Well, we have had our first sort of emergent gameplay moment here in this conflict. So the French just rolled to activate, and they rolled a 1, which means they get 3 activations. And so the first thing that they decided to do was under Guy de Foix, I believe his name is, might be de Foix, the leader de Foix, who is quite good. He decided with his 2 mounted men-at-arms stacks that were up in here, one of whom was elite. They were both 4/4s. He decided he was going to run down into the river and charge the single mounted man-at-arms under Fortebraccio di Montone down here, who was a 5/4. But he was allowed to charge with both of his units because he was a leader. Well, he was a leader. That's a spoiler. With this little star here. Let me focus that for you. With this little star here, which indicates he's a leader of great tactical ability. So he's actually able to charge with both of these units. He decided to do it as a stack because he wanted to split any hits he took evenly amongst the units. And so he charged down across the riverbed here. He was going to slam into Di Montone's knights here. He had a 2-to-1 unit advantage and almost 2-to-1 strength advantage. However, Di Montone's knights were good enough that they were able to countercharge. So the 2 sides met here on the in the middle of the river in this space. That blunted the force from the charge of the French, and it was an extremely bloody affair. They both did 4 hits to each other. The power of charges, I'm seeing now why they are extremely devastating here. Each side, even after the armor mitigation, did 4 hits to each other. That did 3 hits to this mounted men-at-arms, the secondary men-at-arms unit under de Foix, reduced him to his final step. Now, what's interesting about this is actually his final step is actually an elite step, which is kind of interesting that as the unit gets worse, his actual quality gets better. or the unit gets de-strengthened. This unit, which was started elite, also took 1 hit as well. So you've got some, used and abused knights here. And then on this side, Montone with his single unit ended up taking 4 hits as well. And that has degraded his man-at-arms to a 1-0, which is the worst. This is the final step of this unit. But he's still alive. He's still in there. He's still got some horsemen. Not very effective, but he could maybe charge some foot units or archers at some point. Then we had to do a leader casualty roll with both sides. Montone passed quite easily. However, De Foix, not so lucky. He ended up perishing in the combat, in the clash of horses. And you can see his body here lying in the shallows of the river. That is a huge blow to the French. De Foix, one of their best leaders. He was I think he might be the only leader with a great tactical superpower. Certain leaders can do special things if they have a tactical advantage thing. And so he basically took a lance through the head and is floating away down the river. So that leaves us into a really interesting situation where you've still got a massive number of French knights here who, after the charge, both sides, because they did losses, had to retreat and fall back to the space they came from. You've got a huge stack still here of 4 strength French knights stacked together, and this, piddly little, 3 or 4 horsemen left with Montone. However, the French, these knights and these crossbowmen, and you can't see, but up here to the north, there's more crossbowmen, now have no commander, which means they're out of control, control of their leader. And so they're going to have difficulties doing anything for the rest of the game. So the Italians might find that now is the time to get across this river and start wreaking havoc amongst these French positions. Especially because, as I go up here, you can see that way back here is the French heavy artillery, who are in command of the artillery commander over here, but really these units have no leader, so there's not going to be really any effective response that comes from them. So suddenly, in this first, what was probably an ill-advised charge by the French, thinking maybe they could overpower the Italians in the river, has suddenly turned into a left flank that is extremely vulnerable. One quick update here. So I talked about De Foix dying in that charge. I did forget that if a leader has a tactically advantageous leader, a tactical special leader, I forget what the exact term is, but if he has the star, he has some special abilities, and that is once per game, he can actually re-roll a failed leader death check. So I'm going to do that right now and see if he actually died, or if he threw his manservant in the way of the charging horses and managed to sneak out the side of the conflict. Basically, anything 9 or higher is going to result in him actually dying. Otherwise, he lives. So my mistake there. He did use his once per game ability. He managed to cheat death, and he's still in the game. So with their next activation, this French unit with longbowmen moved up, decided to fire on these units in the river. Needed 5s or higher to hit. Ouch.